good to see you all again at Israel's Hope Bible Church online. I'm Ron Grossman, and I'm going to be teaching you again today. And we're starting our series on some basic Bible prophecy background informations, setting the tone for our annual Bible prophecy conferences, which will be held in Montreal on October 24th at Onward Gospel Church in the evening, Thursday night, and here in Ottawa on October 26th, and we're looking forward, and that'll be an Saturday afternoon meeting from 12:30 until about 4:30, 5 o'clock as we normally meet. My co-speaker this year is Pastor Mike Ferreira of Marcoux Road Bible Church near Alexandria, Ontario, and so we're looking forward to seeing you all with us again this year. So I want to begin to set the tone for that so that you'll have an understanding of things. Our topic this year is going to be a mix of different things, kind of jumping off from our topic title, We're Living in Sodom and Gomorrah Times, and trying to understand the times we're in and how it's affecting us worldwide and how God's promises remain. Now, we're also going to look today at the beginning of God's promises regarding his covenant with Abraham. And that will be our topic today. The Abrahamic covenant. We'll be specifically looking at Genesis 12:1-3 with some other portions in the book of Genesis. Next time, we'll be looking at messianic prophecies that point to the first advent of Jesus. And the message after that will be messianic prophecies looking at Jesus' second advent, the Messiah of Israel coming the second time. And our fourth message in this series will be Israel and the church, and how Israel bore the promise. The Gentiles were always a part of God's promise, always welcomed in, but the church, now made up of Jewish people, Israelites and Gentiles, brings us to a new grouping of people called the Christianos, followers of Messiah. And then our final and fifth message in this series will be last events, Jesus' return, the setup of his 1,000-year reign of Christ here on earth, and the eternal state that comes 1,000 years after that. So we're going to look at Genesis 12:1-3 today, the Abrahamic covenant, which is the foundation of all of what we're going to be discussing here the next 5 meetings. And in order for us to have a good ability to understand these things, let's stop, let's pray, and ask the Holy Spirit to direct us. Father God, thank you again. You give us the privilege to meet together here in this venue. We ask now that your Holy Spirit would guide and direct in everything said and done, and that from you would come all the glory and honor. To you would come all the glory and honor. From you would come all the wisdom from your words, literally understood as they appear on the page in front of us. And now we ask that you bless this time. May it be a blessing to those who listen. In Jesus' name, amen. So Genesis 12:1-3. Follow with me, please, as I read. It says the following. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Note that these 3 verses end with a promise to all the families of the earth. And this promise is fulfilled in the Messiah. Now, Abram is a descendant who comes from Shem, one of the sons of Noah. So if you remember the flood account, Genesis 6-9, you'll know that Noah had 3 sons. One of them, his name was Shem. And from Shem, and you read about Shem and his descendants and how they came to Abram in Genesis chapter 11. After the events of the Tower of Babel, starting in verse 10, you read of Shem's lineage through to and including Abram. It starts in verse 10 and continues right through to verse 26 of Genesis 11. You should read that on your own in your own time. Then the family of Terah is singled out, and it's from the family of Terah that Abram comes. Abram and his other family relationships are described to us there, and you read about Lot in there as well and others, and how Terah moves his family to Haran from Ur of the Chaldees. So you see, the family of Abram that Abram comes from comes from Chaldea. They are not people who occupied the land that we today call Israel, the land of Israel. They came from Ur of the Chaldee. They were Chaldeans, but being Chaldeans, they specifically were descendants of Shem, and it's from the lineage of Shem that the promise of Messiah is born to the world. And the peoples of Abram were Shemitic peoples. And of course, you have heard that those who do not like the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they do not like the Shemitic peoples, the Semitic peoples. That's where the Semitic peoples come from. Shemites, descendants of Shem. Those who hate the descendants of Shem are anti-Shemites, if we can toy with the word, to make the point that God specifically chose out a people, a lineage, for his purposes. Now that we have this background and this understanding of who Shem is, we now are going to read about his comings and goings from this land. In verse 1 of Genesis 12, we read this, where again we read, "The Lord said to Abram, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show you." Now, what we have here is a promise of a land, a telling to Abram to go. Now, the reason why I'm saying it like that, a telling of Abram to go, is because it is written in the imperative tense. This is a command that is given here from God to Abram. It's not, will you consider going? Think about it. Maybe in a year or so. It is, you will go. And Abram goes. There are actually two imperatives in verse 1. The first imperative is, leave your country, go to the land. Not a land, but it reads literally from the original in Hebrew, it reads to the land. So there is a specific land that is chosen here for Abram to go to. And because of this command, we see something about God's character here. He says to Abram, go to a land that I will show thee, or give to you, give to thee. It's a picture of God's character. God's personality is he makes irrevocable promises. When God promises to do something, he keeps his promises. God's character does not change. God does not change in his personality and his character. What he has set out to do from the beginning of time, he will continue to do. He is the immutable, unchanging God. His promises, therefore, are built into his character. If God is immutable, unchanging, then his promises are not going to change either. God doesn't change his mind. When he promises to do something, he carries it through. Now, this gives us, as followers of the Messiah, Christianos, you heard me use that a little earlier. We'll deal with that in about 4 or 5 weeks. If we know all of that about God's future promises, these promises will remain to be fulfilled. Now think, if God made promises to Abram, now almost 3,800 years ago, and decided, I'm not going to fulfill them. I'm not going to follow through on what I promised to do. Think about the chaos that would come upon planet Earth, because there'd be absolutely no hope. And there would be no end to what we have here on planet Earth now, which is the people who were created by God, who live in a sinful condition, in a sinful situation. We have all inherited the sin of Adam and Eve, and the only way to be made right with God is to return to him as he has made the promise he would fulfill in his Son, the Messiah. And we're going to see in these first 3 verses of Genesis how he looks future down the line to fulfill those promises. God does not change his mind about anything. And because he doesn't, This promise to Abram, given in an imperative command to go to a land that I will give to you, is a promise that will be kept forever. The land in the Middle East that is disputed by so many different people groups right now, whatever they want to put a label of themselves on, whatever a group of terrorists or whatever say that they are going to disperse the peoples of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from off of this land, they're not going to do it, because God's promises are irrevocable because of his character, which is immutable. He is the unchanging God. And if he ever changed his mind about any of these promises he made, even just to Israel, just the promises to Israel, there would be chaos on planet Earth. Now, here he tells us that you are to go to a land, leave your father's house, leave your kindred, your family behind. There's a sidebar here, you might say. God told Abram to break every social covenant, you might say, of his day. Everything that was expected of people and how they lived their lives. Change it, Abram. Leave your family. Leave all of those people behind. Follow me. Go where I'm going to be sending you now. It's never easy to follow God. It doesn't mean that because God says, follow me, that it will be an easy thing. It oftentimes is a difficult thing, but it is not impossible. And we see from how Abram's life eventually turned out that by following God and accepting his invitation, his imperative invitation, if I can add, to go where he was commanded to go, that it brought blessing to Abram and will bring blessing to any and all who turn to him as well. Turn to God in the person of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. Now, God says here to Abram that I will make of you a great nation. You will be a blessing, he says. From this land, from leaving your father's house, leaving this land, I'll make of you a great nation. We're into verse 2 right now. Now he says here, you shall be a blessing. Look at the verse, how it's constructed. I'll make of thee a great nation. Abram at this point in his life is childless. He's of advanced age as well. And he is wondering, well, how would I become a great nation? Where are you going to have me to become a great nation? Well, God can take the impossible and make it possible. He says to Abram here in verse 2, I'll make of you a great nation. And he kept his promise. He did give them a child, them being Abram and Sarai. Now, along the way, Sarai devised her own plan and proposed a child for the two of them after she heard from Abram, who had probably said to her, I've heard from God, and he's told me we're to go to a land, and he's also told me that we're going to have a family. Now, when they left for that land, I think they may have been 65, 70 years of age, give or take. And here would Sarai be saying, I'm going to have a child. I'm well past childbearing years. There's no way I'm going to have a child. Well, they may have been childless. And they may have devised their own plan. You can read about that in Genesis 15, where Sarai says, okay, if we're going to have a family, I have a slave girl, Hagar. We got her down in Egypt. Tell you what, we can have a child through her. She will bear the child for us. Well, we know what came of that. Ishmael came to be, and that was in Genesis 16. And the result of doing things their way has been a cause of no end to grief to the people of Israel ever since. But God allowed it. It's hard to understand sometimes why God allows some things, even in the midst of when he has made promises and he's an unchanging and immutable God. Think about your own life. How many times do you know when you read in the scriptures that God says he'll keep a promise, and you cling and hold to that promise, but then sometimes your actions aren't exactly ones that understand what it means to cling and hold to a promise. It's because of the fact that we've all inherited the same sin nature from Adam and Eve that we make these sometimes wrong decisions, but not impossible decisions. God is able to overrule. And the reason why is because, again, in his immutable character, his person, God sets out to accomplish the things he is going to accomplish, regardless of even the mistake that we will make. Now, Abram and Sarai, they went about it their own way. It's no different than Adam and Eve in the garden, when Eve was tempted and said, okay, I'll try this fruit. And Adam, who should have known better, and making certain that she was protected from being deceived like that. God continues to overrule even despite the error and mistake of human beings, the people that God has created. Why? He loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Here in these verses, we're looking forward down the corridor of time. The absolute promise of the coming of Messiah had not yet been fulfilled. Yet God said, I have a program that I'm going to accomplish through the descendants of Abram and Sarai. Eventually their names would be changed. We'll deal with that in a few moments. Even though they made these decisions, or this decision to try and have their family through Hagar, the nation would come as promised. And he did come, the nation did come as promised. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 5, God says this to Abram. He says this, neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be called Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. Now that would take you all the way back to verse 3 of Genesis 12, where it says that all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you, the father of many nations. Abram becomes Avraham, Abraham in the English, and it means the father of many nations. Because through the descendants of Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, to the 12 tribes, to King David, to Jesus the Messiah, comes blessing to all the families of the earth. It's fulfilled in the church. It has its roots and beginnings here in Genesis chapter 12 and is fulfilled in what we call God's called out people. That's what the word church means. If you're a Jewish person listening in today and you're saying, I don't have anything to do with church, well, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you don't have anything to do with church because you've been taught that it's not for you, but it's wrong teaching. All the word church means is called out people. And the church is made up of various nation groups of people, including this nation group here. And this nation group here is the people of Israel. I will make of thee a great nation. Go back to Genesis 12, verse 2. I will make of thee a great nation, God says to Abram here. Jewish people would say, well, it's the religion of Judaism. I'm a Jewish person because of my religion. If you're a Jewish person listening in today, know this. You weren't called Jewish. We weren't called Jewish people until after the Babylonian captivity, and it's not a very nice label that was given to us. We were the Judes from Judah. It was a derogatory way that the Babylonians spoke of us. We are a nation of people, the Hebrew peoples. And it's because we're a nation that our worship of God is totally and completely wrapped up in our nationhood. It's not religion. It's our following by faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's why I call myself a biblical believer in God. If you want to call me a Christian, that's fine. If you want to call me a Jewish Christian, that's fine. I haven't stopped being Jewish, because if you're a Gentile who comes from the land of Great Britain, you're still from a United Kingdom person who is a Christian. The word Christian, and from the Greek word that's used in the New Testament, Christianos, literally means follower of Messiah. Are you a follower of the Messiah? That's the key question. Now, Abram's name was changed to Abraham, father of many, because through him would come blessing to all the families of the earth through the Messiah. So he's the father of many nations. And Sarai's name is changed also in Genesis chapter 17, specifically verse 15. And here it says, and God said unto Abraham. Now notice he's calling him Abraham just 10 verses after he changes his name. As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. Her name was changed to Sarah, which means princess. One commentator says this about the name change. The name of Sarai to Sarah, being a princess, is a fitting title for one who would bear a king to the world. You see, the king was born to the world through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that king is Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. So, verse 1, an imperative is given. Go to a land, leave your father's house, go to a land. 2 imperatives are given. Go, do this. And Abram goes. And because of his obedience, blessing will come. A great nation will come to you, he says in verse 2, and I'll bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Abram became a blessing to all the nations of this world because of his obedience to go. How many times has God said to you, I want you to do, and you stood back and you didn't do? It does not mean that God has withdrawn his promises from you. It just means you missed out on more of the promise that you could have had. If God calls you to go, go. Do what Abram did. Break the social rules of the day. Go. Now, honor your parents. It's written in the law. It's part of the New Testament command. We should honor our parents, honor our family. But we should know this, that when God says to go, it does not mean that it's going to be easy to go. And it wasn't. For Abram, it meant leaving everything behind and accepting God's imperative command to go. And he did. Now look at verse 3 as we begin to conclude here today. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now we've already discussed that the family blessing to all the families of the earth is to be fulfilled in the Messiah. The church is made up of Jewish and Gentile people. We'll deal with that again in a few moments. But look at the nations over the centuries that have cursed the people of God, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I can give you 5 very specific examples in history of nations that have oppressed or cursed the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Egypt enslaved God's people, and God destroyed Egypt in the plagues that are described to us in the book of Exodus. And Pharaoh's army, when he changed his mind after the final defeat, the death of every firstborn, including the firstborn male of every house, and that defeated Pharaoh's ability to claim himself to be God, because the Pharaoh said, I'm God and I continue to be God because I live on in my son who's coming after me. And Pharaoh's son died. How could he be God if his son died? Pharaoh's armies then, when he changed his mind, he took his armies and he pursued Israel who was being led by Moses at the beginning of the Exodus, right to the Red Sea. And that's where God parted the Red Sea. Israel went across to the other side. And as they got across to the other side, Egypt's armies went in after them as well, through what had been that opening in the water. Except they didn't make it. God closed the waters in over them, drowned the army of Egypt, and Egypt, who was the great world power at that time in that age, has never been a world power ever since. I'll bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. Another example is Babylon. Babylon was used as an instrument to make God's people Israel obedient after their many, many years of not keeping a sabbatical year, for the 70 sabbatical years from the time of the Exodus entering the land until the time of the Babylonians came in 586 BC. But they took things a little too far, and Belshazzar's profaning of the temple implements in Daniel chapter 5 was the last straw. And the Babylonian Empire fell that very night. Read Daniel chapter 5, and you read about the handwriting on the wall. When God judges, he judges. Babylon was destroyed as a nation, and Persia was the nation that rose up in its place, took over as the world leader, and allowed the Hebrew peoples to return to the land as promised in Isaiah chapter 44, 45, and 46. Think about Russia and the Pale of Russia, and how the Jewish people who lived in Russia prior to the Russian Revolution of 1917 were so poorly treated. The Cossacks would just kill any Jewish person they wished to, because they had the blessing of the Tsar of Russia to do those things. And there was the Russian Revolution of 1917 that came. It's a land that has been ruled despotically before that by the Tsars, and since then by the communists and the people who've replaced them since that time. And nothing has changed in Russia. It's an oppressed people still, and it's a nation that is cursed in its own way. The Babylonian kingdom was cursed, and it ceased to exist. Egypt was cursed. It ceased to exist. Think about in contemporary history, two examples. The United Kingdom in 1917, through the Balfour Declaration, made a promise to Israel that the King of England, the King of the United Kingdom, would look favorably to assist the Jewish people in establishing a land for themselves in that very place that at the time was referred to as Palestine. And by 1924, 7 years after the initiation of the Balfour Declaration, by 1924, 7 years later, the United Kingdom changed her mind. By the mid-1930s, the empire crumbled. The Commonwealth came into existence to uphold what had been there before. And England found herself in the middle of World War II without any aid or assistance from the United States until the United States was attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Many realized that had the USA not come into World War II, that the dire end of things may have come at that time. The British people turned their back on Israel after making a promise. And if you have been to or have seen England in its current condition, Scotland, the United Kingdom in general, and I've been there on a couple of occasions and have seen the fact that there are more churches that have been turned into other kinds of worship centers than they were initially erected to be. And it's an example in the 20th century scheme of things of people who turned their back on Israel. And of course, there's Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany, from 1933 to 1945, with the implementation of the final solution to destroy the Jewish people, to rid the earth of the Jewish people, and people who were involved in the leadership of all that were tried at Nuremberg, the ones that didn't commit suicide at least. And Germany was an occupied nation from 1945 until the wall was taken down in 1989 into 1990. Germany remained an occupied and divided nation. West Germany, East Germany. If you remember your contemporary history of the mid to late 20th century, you know that Germany divided, one side being communist, the other side being a free democratic nation. The Berlin Wall, a nation that was in turmoil for so many years. And why? The final solution: to rid the world of the Jewish people. Hitler committed suicide rather than face trial for what he was behind, which was the Holocaust. Germany has paid a price for it, and it's an example of "I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you" of Genesis 12:1-3. But there's hope, you see, and the hope is found in the fact that there is a blessing. Look at verse 3. "I'll bless them that bless thee, curse them that curseth thee, but," look at the latter part of verse 3, "in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." If you bless the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you are a person who has the capability, if I can say it like that, to take the blessing of God upon into themselves. You can become a follower of the Messiah, who is the one who will bless all the families of the earth here. The Messiah is not just for Israel. The Messiah is first promised to Israel here when God says, "I'll make of you a great nation, and from this great nation will come blessing, a land, blessing, a family, a nation people, and blessing to all the families of the earth." This is a messianic promise. It's a messianic promise that it was eventually fulfilled in the first advent of Jesus, and will be finally and completely fulfilled when the same Jesus returns first to take the church out of this world in the rapture, and then comes back with his people, the church, to put down that horrific time called Armageddon at the end of Revelation chapter 19. Now, we'll deal with those things in weeks to come. But you see, from Israel, from Abram, who would become Abraham, father of many, Sarai, who would become Sarah, the princess, who would bear this blessing to the whole world, comes the promise that God has not changed his mind about. Now, let me tell you something about not changing his mind. If God promised Abraham a land, he hasn't changed his mind about that. And that land is laid out for us in Genesis 12-22, where the promise is expanded on and expanded on and expanded on, until we understand that the promise is for all the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of the Gentile nations who look on the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who see from them the promise of blessing to all the families of the earth, and they come to that promise and they say, "I want that God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Now, there are 3 lessons from all of this. And lesson number 1 is this simply: God's plan for Israel has its beginning here, but still awaits its final fulfillment. If you are a Jewish person looking in today, you may be sitting there and saying, "What do you mean, being Jewish and being a follower of Jesus?" It's not what I mean. It's what the scriptures say. The scriptures are very clear that the Messiah is for all nations of the world. And again, look at what God says to Abram. He says in verse 2 of Genesis 12, "I'll make of you a great nation," not a religion. So don't get caught up in religion and what rabbis have taught now for centuries. It's not religion. It's a faith-based following of the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is not just for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but as it says here, for all the families of the earth at the end of verse 3. The second lesson from this is Israel is still in God's plan. They are still God's chosen people. God does not change his mind. There are some people who would say this to you: "Well, you're a Jewish person and you were a follower of the rabbis and the Pharisees, etc., at the time of Jesus, God said, that's it, I'm done with Israel. They rejected me, so now I'm just for the other nations. That's not what it says. Israel does not cease to be a nation people before God. Israel still is going to be restored to God. Israel is told that through the prophet Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 31, 32, 33. If the sun and the moon would stop to go through all of their natural courses, then Israel would stop to be a nation from before me forever, and that will never happen. God's promises are irrevocable, and he is coming back for his people Israel and the Gentile nation peoples who are followers of the same Messiah, Jesus the Messiah. Why? Because God doesn't change his mind. And he hasn't changed his mind and never will. The third lesson is simply this. Blessing the people of Israel brings blessing to all people who bless the people of Israel. Now there are some Jewish people who are still remaining outside of the church. And does that mean then that we should curse them because they're not accepting the promises of God? Absolutely not. What it does mean is that we need to be a blessing to them so that perhaps, as Paul wrote to the church in Rome, that they may become jealous of the Gentiles who have embraced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and want to know more about who is this God you're following after. There have been a lot of things told to Jewish people about Jesus. I remember being told many of those things myself growing up in a Jewish home, that this isn't for us. It's some made-up Gentile God. It isn't made up because you read about the whole story here in this book called the Bible. So it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Gentile. God has a future for you, has a future for the people of Israel, a future for all the nation peoples of this world, that he wants them to come to him. And he begins to flesh out this promise here, as we have read and looked at today, in the beginning of the Abrahamic promise of Genesis 12, 1-3. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. And I hope if there is a question that you have, if you're not that follower of Messiah Jesus, Jewish or Gentile, if you have a question, I'd love to hear from you. My email address appears at the bottom of the screen. You can be in touch through email, or you can be in touch through our website. You can look at www.ihopecanada.org. We are a faith ministry, an organization that trusts God to serve God's people and those who would call on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By doing the things that we do here, the teaching of his word online and in other various ways, our conferences, our one-to-one activities on a daily basis. And if you feel led of the Lord to assist in this ministry continuing to go forward, we would love to hear from you. You may send, if you have a sense of God's calling to participate in the giving to this ministry. We'd love to hear from you. You can write to us at the box number. You can send a regular old-fashioned check that way at our P.O. box number as it appears on the screen below. Or you can give online. Go to our webpage and you can give online through PayPal or through other sources as well, there, e-transfer, etc. We'd love to hear from you. Again, if you have a question, send it along. I'd love to answer those questions for you. But until next time, we would say to you simply this: Shalom. Goodbye.